Welcome to Just a Parishioner. I'm Lorenz Zaragoza.
I'm Sean Greeley.
And we're back, man.
Yeah, it's been a few months.
It's been a few months.
We love taking hiatuses on this podcast. I will say that.
Big first quarter hiatus, guys, right here. We go into Christmas and then we just say, you know what? We're not doing this anymore.
Yeah. I mean, listen, Christmas is busy. And then after that, we're just like, you know what? We have a lot of priorities going on. And for some reason, podcasting just falls by the wayside.
However, that is what we are going to talk about today,
right.
Because there are a lot of moving parts and a lot of reasons as to why we took this hiatus also.
Yeah.
I will say this hiatus, I gotta stop using that word hiatus. This hiatus was much shorter than the last one, which was like a year long.
Yeah. Well, this one was less traumatic, to be fair.
Fair enough. But Purple. We got ambiance now for those looking on YouTube.
Sponsored by Purple Mattress.
That's right. It is Lent.
We're not sponsored by Purple Mattress.
No, but it is Lent.
We'll welcome a sponsorship, but that's okay.
You're really on the sponsorship. Okay.
So Lent, yes.
Lent.
Yeah,
so we're recording during Lent right now. You may be listening after Lent, especially those of you who only know the podcast through social media. And if you took a break from social media, we welcome you back.
Yeah. And you know, we're probably 2 weeks left in Lent at this point. I think not this next weekend, but the following weekend is Palm Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. So
while we're recording, you're probably listening and it's probably after Palm Sunday.
Yeah.
Or maybe leading into it.
Yeah. Something like that.
So we're recording. It depends on when I edit it and put it out.
That's right.
Okay.
It might be after Easter at this point. Who knows?
They don't care, I guess. But it's all good. I hope everybody's having a blessed Lent. How's your Lent going?
It's good.
I'll tell you how mine's going, but yeah.
Yeah, I was just talking about how this Lent was something I've never really done before, is that I've given up alcohol.
I've done that.
Yeah, it's my first time. So if you're watching, you can see my non-alcoholic seltzer on the table here. It's very exciting.
And my beer is really close to you right now.
I smell it. I smell it and it smells great.
Well, it is Harp.
Yeah.
It's great.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, exactly. St. Patrick's Day. Good St. Patrick's Day too.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was.
But Lent's going well?
It is. Yeah. I mean, I think that I've actually had like a lot of fruitful thought from like the alcohol hiatus, just to stay on that theme, around health and around like the social lubrication sense of it, and like whether that's healthy or not in my life, to the degree that I have relied on it sometimes. And yeah, just a little good reflection there. And yeah, I think just from a spiritual perspective, the alcohol I don't think has played like a massive role in that, but I do think that it's almost like left me just with a more clarity of mind than some other times, you know?
I gave up alcohol. I think it was 2 years, maybe 3 years, and my relationships were better. I gave up coffee for a couple of years. My relationships were far worse.
Oh,
I'm exaggerating actually on both ends, to be honest with you.
But I don't think I would give up coffee.
No,
that would be tough.
That was rough. But I did give up alcohol, and it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. There were a couple of instances that were rough. One of them, I had a wedding that I was flying down to Florida for during Lent with a lot of my college friends. And if they're your college friends, you know, most of the time, talking about social lubrication, unfortunately, a lot of college friendships the foundation is alcohol.
Oh, yeah.
Not in every instance.
No, but you met like your freshman year and they had beer and you went in their room and now you're best friends.
Right.
Like.
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Shout out. No, not name calling right now. But anyway, I flew down with, here's the thing, a couple of best friends from home and some best friends from college, and ended up powering through. Didn't have a sip of alcohol, but again, it proved to me I could have fun at weddings without any alcohol.
Yeah.
But then there was one here on Long Island that I went to, and it was on St. Patrick's Day. And man, I had fun at the wedding, but do I wish I had a beer? Like it was,
right.
It was, but again, it's what we give up, right? We offer that up.
I'll be honest. I had a beer on St. Patrick's Day. One beer, one Guinness.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's your Irish in you.
I cheated a little bit, but I kind of treated it like a feast day because of the whole Irish thing. I know it's kind of BS, but yeah, I did try to be a little more penitential the following day for what it's worth. But
okay. You needed to do that twice because you had meat on St. Patrick's Day also.
I had a dispensation, bro.
Yes, but But in our diocese, the dispensation was also you needed to.
There's a whole theology. I'm not going to say theology, but a whole like understanding around Lent where like what you give up isn't like a sin if you go back into it. So
Dude, I'm joking around.
we're going to make this a catechesis right now.
So is eating meat on a Friday a sin?
I think
during Lent
that the Western Church is super fluffy on that.
Fluffy.
Yeah. Fluffy and like it's
appropriate word. Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be the title of this episode is the Western Church is fluffy.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, obviously, traditionally, Catholics were supposed to give up meat on Fridays. And I think even on Wednesdays, certain times of the year during like Ember Days, they were called, if I'm remembering that correctly. But with that being said, I don't think that any bishops or any popes at this point would tell you that it's a sin to do that.
Interesting.
With that being said, traditional teaching would still hold that you're supposed to make that sacrifice in keeping with tradition of the church. So sinful, I'm not going to be the one who makes a moral call on that, but right. Keeping with tradition, like, yes, you would be giving up throughout the year, giving up meat.
Yeah, my question was the black and white sin, yes or no.
You got to talk to a priest about that.
Yeah, but we are just parishioners.
We are just parishioners. Yeah.
With that said, Lent, this is a good Lent for me.
Yeah, talk about it.
Having a good Lent, and I credit The Chosen for it.
Okay, so just background, Lorenz and I have talked about The Chosen quite a bit. My wife, Julia, and I love The Chosen, and I'm sure a lot of people out there do, but Lorenz has not watched it up until recently.
Yes, and we started maybe a week or two into Lent. We're through 2 seasons already. We're going to start the 3rd season whenever you get out of my studio in my house. But it has been amazing, and it's to the point where, it's just giving me, I'll say that it's given me a refresher on my prayer life, and like small little things where like watching them wake up in the morning and start off with prayer. I'm like, man, I need to get back to that. I am using the Hallow app, not a sponsor. I am using the Hallow app, and it gives me an alert like 5:30 in the morning prayer. So when I wake up, whether it's 5:30, whether it's 6:30, that's the first notification on my phone. Click that 1 minute morning prayer, and then I move on. And that encourages me to pray throughout the day. Just that first prayer in the morning. So prayer life, this has been a good Lent strictly because of that. And I will credit The Chosen for that. And I've cried 80% of episodes, if not more.
100%.
Oh man.
100%, 80%.
I cry 100% of the time, 80% of the time. But yes, good Lent. Trying to finish strong.
Yeah. Just on the topic of The Chosen, I mean, it's wild how well done it is. And it just makes you think about like other productions of Christian or Catholic movies or shows that you might have seen that didn't have good production. And you're like, wow, how did so many people miss the mark on this? And then all of a sudden The Chosen comes out and you're like, oh my gosh, this is incredible.
Absolutely incredible.
Incredible. And there are to this, I mean, obviously it's only been out for a few years now, but like there are scenes that I saw 2 years ago watching season 1 that I'm reading the Bible now, doing some kind of prayer or in mass reading it or hearing the gospel. And the scene that I think of is the scene that I saw from The Chosen. Like Jesus calling Peter to follow him and calling Andrew to follow him. I see the actor from The Chosen, Peter, falling on his knees and saying, Lord, I'm not worthy to follow you.
Right.
Like I'm a sinful man. And like right now I'm getting chills just thinking about it,
Yeah. And the scene, I think we spoke about this offline, but the scene that like really got to me, was just it's a scene of forgiveness, essentially. And again, if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to talk about it right now, but there's a scene of forgiveness. And the reason why it hits us is, number one, we're seeing the gospel come to life, right? With great production value.
Yeah.
Because there are plenty of shows that have done it with okay. There are even more that have done it with god awful production value.
Yeah.
But the second thing is we're seeing the apostles, Jesus's disciples, his followers, we're seeing them as humans. And I'm trying to do myself to put myself in their shoes. And even when I'm not trying, there are scenes that I'm putting myself in their shoes, and many times they're saying, like you said, like they're not worthy. And Jesus literally handpicked them, and they're feeling like they're not worthy.
Yeah.
And so it makes me okay when I feel like I'm not worthy. And then just like that, in every scene, Jesus is like, yes, you are.
Yeah. And
hugs or embraces or some kind of gesture to let them know, like I picked you. And he picks all of us. Like he chooses all of us. And man, like again, talking about chills, like I'm getting choked up, like thinking about this stuff. Great Lent.
I mean, just to put a cap on that, I really think it's a reminder that really in our humanity, we're not worthy of God and we're not worthy of Christ, but Christ makes us worthy through his redemption of our sins and through his death and resurrection. And he gives us that gateway to join him in that eternal happiness and that ultimate worthiness to be kind of participants in the divine majesty of what God is.
And I mean, again, to piggyback off of that, it's just like, how many times do I need to get reminded of this? Like
literally every day.
Yeah, every single day I need to be reminded of it. And I need to either remind myself or have somebody help me, right? And I think that's a good transition to talk about why, the reason for our hiatus and life and things that got in the way in a good way.
Yeah.
Right. And it's reminders, right? Like our wives are reminders to us. The sacrament that we both went into of matrimony. Your marriage is a great reminder that God loves you.
For sure.
Sorry. I thought you were going to say something.
For sure.
For sure. So, I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind is, who is going, if I'm not going to remind myself, who's going to remind me? And are you reminding your spouse? I know there are times that I can be better at that, at being a holy person and help and giving my spouse, giving Katie a little nudge, like, hey, let's do this, let's do that, let's pray together. Things of that nature,
Yeah. I know we were just talking about this a little bit where we're recording today. The Feast of St. Joseph just passed recently. So maybe, a few weeks ago, if you're listening now. But I was trying to reflect a little bit on that day about St. Joseph being, the patron saint of men in general, but also for fatherhood, being a really holy husband, a protector, a guide, not only a physical guide, but a spiritual guide for the Holy Family, a worker, like the way that he worked to provide for his family, and just how many ways that is so clearly like manifested now in my own life because I am a husband and I am working to support my current and future families. And yeah, I mean, just one of the big reasons that I haven't been as available for podcasting recently is that my wife and I just recently found out that we're pregnant too. And there's this whole shadow of fatherhood that's kind of dawning on me now too. Parenthood for both of us, motherhood for my wife. But for me, yeah, like thinking about what qualifies me to be a father, what does it mean to even be a father and kind of transition into that mindset. You can speak to that a lot more intelligently than I can, obviously, with your multitude of children.
You would think so, right?
I would hope so. I would hope so. That some wisdom comes with some experience. Maybe not. I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, we're doing our best on our side. So, like, again, I've said it to you offline, but online, I mean, like the biggest congratulations to you and Julia because what a blessing. What an absolute blessing. For the ability to bring children into the world, right?
For sure, yeah.
On top of that, I mean, again, it's exciting as well, right? Like Katie and I are expecting our 5th, so
that's right. Awesome,
yeah, and that's in a few months. So, yeah, our children are going to be 3-4 months apart from each other, which is the coolest thing in the world.
It's awesome.
But being open to children, I mean. It's one thing being open to children. It's another thing being blessed with a child. So, I mean, if you could speak to that between you and Julia and just on the faith side of it all, and when you found out, and again, you don't need to go into crazy amounts of detail, but like the path to and just. And like the joy, and the joy of hearing that first heartbeat that you and I have spoken about, the joy of the doctor's appointments and all that, and it's all very exciting stuff.
Oh yeah, it's mind blowing. I mean, it's funny. Julia and I have been helping out speaking at the pre-Cana program for the diocese over the last 6 to 8 months. We've kind of co-hosted some of the events and then also given talks here and there where needed. And recently, just actually a couple of weeks ago, we gave a talk about the realities of marriage, which is almost a joke for us to be given that. We've been married for like 15 months at this point, and we're going in front of all these couples, most of which who have been dating for longer than we've known, like not known each other, but longer than we've been together.
I mean, it's New York. Probably most of them older than you guys. Too.
Most of them in their 30s. Most of them in their 30s, and I'm 29. Most of them have been dating for at least 3 to 5 years, and they're living together, and some of them have houses together. And meanwhile, Julia and I have been quote unquote together for like 3 years at this point, and we got married less than 2 years after starting dating, right? So everyone I don't know how everyone looks at us when we're doing this kind of thing, but I can imagine the way that they think when we're up there trying to give them advice on marriage or relationships. But that being said, I think once you're married and you do get some experience together, you just have some wisdom to share, just because there are elements that most dating couples aren't taking into account. And part of that is children, right? Most dating couples are going to be actively avoiding trying to have children. Most of them, unfortunately, are having premarital sex, but probably using contraception along the way, etc. And one of the things we said to them was, it's in our experience, like, you don't think about ahead of time children not showing up when you immediately want them to show up, as far as getting pregnant. Because there were months that went by where Julia and I were trying, but it didn't quite happen. And we're both young, healthy people. And when it finally did, it finally happened, and we were pursuing it and we were wanting it. And every time it didn't happen, it hurt, but we got there. And it was just such a moment of joy, like seeing like Julia's face when she came out and told me that she tested positive, or had a positive pregnancy test. Yeah, that carries such
phrasing,
a connotation with COVID, among other things.
Weird
right?
choice of words, bro.
Yeah. Sorry, I haven't had to talk about it too much yet.
Yeah.
When she had the positive pregnancy test, and we got to share that moment of joy together, and then going to get the doctors the first time and starting to share it with some close family and friends, and finally kind of making it a lot more openly public and being able to share those moments of joy with everybody that we know.
Totally.
It was so good. I feel like there's those moments where sharing such awesome news. Like, I remember when we got engaged, there was that moment on our wedding day. It was amazing being able to celebrate with everybody. And then like your first child, I don't have a second child yet, so I don't know what that's going to be like. But first child, being able to share that experience, it's just like, oh gosh, this is amazing. Yeah. Absolutely awesome.
I mean, it's going to sound awful, but with our fifth, and we didn't tell people until Katie was like 5 months pregnant.
Right. Yep.
Like something like 4.5, 5 months pregnant. We didn't tell our parents until she was like 3 or 4 months pregnant. And it wasn't this is kind of old to us thing. It's what it seems like. It's one of those where we did the announcements, and we loved the announcements, mm-hmm. and the love pouring in. But there was a different aspect to this where it's like, this is us now. Like, you and I know, and there's something cool about that too.
Yeah.
So both aspects of like, you're having your relationship with your wife, Julia, and then making it public. Again, great feelings, right? Mm-hmm. Especially, I mean, we've spoken about this also with the difficulties that Katie and I had with the 2 miscarriages prior to our eldest. And yes, it's this longing, right? This longing for a child that's growing, and despair grows with it, doubt grows with it. And I would love to say the phrase "all's well that ends well," but I don't think that's it. I think it's a journey, right? And it is what it is, mm-hmm. right? It is what it is. And at the end of the day, as long as you're open to it, God's will be done, which is easier said than to live. But as long as you're open to it, God is happy with that, right? Because at the end of the day, like you said, I'm not going to tell somebody who's trying, I'm not going to tell them, oh, don't worry, it's going to happen. Because I don't know that.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know that for certain.
Yeah.
All I can say is, listen, pray, let God's will be done. And, you know, praise be to God. You guys are expecting your first in September
2023.
That's
yeah,
right.
It's pretty cool.
That's right. But yeah, congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, I think you're honing in on something, I think, that is so important in marriage, but even just in a personal relationship with God. And that's really discernment and having a good enough prayer life to be able to understand where God is guiding you. And it's not like you hit like a certain level of prayer where you're going to hear God's voice clearly, but if you don't spend any time in prayer or any time in silence to be able to try to receive what God is trying to give you in your life, and you're not extending your hand to grab his, then all of this is very, very difficult to get through, regardless of whether you're trying to have a kid and can't, or you are having a kid and you're trying to prepare for that and understand what your role is going to be. Or even if you're just married and trying to get through a marriage, like not having God at the center of your life and at the center of ultimately your relationship with your spouse or with your child, I think that's going to cause a lot of pain and suffering down the road.
Right.
It's one of these things where you have the source of all happiness, all life, all eternity at your fingertips if you just extend your fingertips a little bit and you can make contact there. And if you don't, then all that you have is the one other thing that's guaranteed in our life, and that's suffering. You know, I think it's like the tragedy of the modern world that people really have a severe lack of understanding of that.
Right. Including us.
Including us, of course. Yeah,
us.
Absolutely.
And it's one of those things that I need to practice what I preach, because we were talking about pre-Cana, and I've done a talk down here in Long Beach, one or two, I forget, but I've done other talks as well. I've done some talks about marriage and having children over at some of the universities on Long Island. And I always go back to this, and I didn't come up with this. I read this in a devotional book that Katie and I were reading, but it's expectations of yourself, expectations of your spouse, expectations of your children. And it's a brutal concept for me to wrap my head around. And if I'm having trouble with it, then everybody else is. Where your spouse and your children will not make you happy.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
They will not. Yeah. I'm sorry. They will not fulfill your desire to be happy.
Yeah.
Let me read.
They'll make you happy. They'll make you happy, of course. Absolutely.
And again, but your wife and your children will never fulfill your desire for happiness.
Yeah.
Okay. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean by that is, like you said, there are so many times nobody makes me happier, like here, right? As a person, as flesh, as my wife and my children. And every single day is a blessing, and they make me happy. But if you have the expectation that they are going to fulfill your desire for ultimate happiness, number one, you're going to be disappointed, regardless of who your children and spouse are. Mm-hmm. You're going to be disappointed. And number two, that is an unfair expectation that you are putting on your spouse and that I am putting on my kids.
Yeah, it's a huge burden.
It's a huge burden.
Your kids especially. I mean, your spouse is another adult, but when you put it, I mean, I don't have kids, but it's just putting that expectation on anybody that young it's almost abusive.
Right.
I think you could qualify it that way.
Totally. But same with the spouse.
Yeah.
Same with your wife, same with your husband. If you marry them saying, well, once I get married to this person, because we know the honeymoon phase, once I get married to so-and-so, I'm finally going to be happy. But then the honeymoon phase fades away for everybody, right? For everybody. And if you're disappointed that happened, you had unrealistic expectations of your spouse and marriage, and frankly, that's kind of on you, and that's on me, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm marrying a person, and they are human. And guess what? I really hope that my wife doesn't have those expectations of me, because she will be disappointed, because the only source of that happiness that we're desiring, that eternal happiness that we're desiring, is God. That he is the only source. So like I don't have this analogy down perfect yet, but like I think of like me, like myself, and I have 4 kids, right? So if I have 4 kids and and Katie and I, there are 6 of us. So I think of like this shape, right? A hexagon, right?
A sixagon.
A sixagon. I didn't say sixagon, but I'm thinking of a hexagon, right? And you look at the outline of a hexagon and it is a shape, right? But what fills that hexagon with color and life is God. So I'm looking at us as all these, like, we create the shape. Our family is this shape together, but we need to fill that with something. And that void in the middle of this empty outline is God. And it will not be fulfilled. The only person who could fill that is God.
Yeah.
I'll get that analogy down one day.
Yeah.
It's there's something there.
There's something there, yeah.
But it's not perfect, because it like a man and a wife, even if they don't have children but are open to children, I don't know how you fill a line. So maybe a dotted line,
a vector.
Yeah.
Well,
so I mean, I'll work on that analogy.
Yeah.
It's okay, right?
Well, two thoughts come to mind. Two thoughts. So what you're talking about, it's kind of reminiscent of the imagery of the Trinity, which is really what the family is meant to mimic, right? The family is meant to be this one person expressing their love to the other so fully, and that being returned so fully that it actually produces an image of the two of them in a way, right? Mm-hmm. And that's similar kind of to the idea, the classical imagery of the Trinity from Augustine that we have, where the Father, it's not a perfect scenario. There's no perfect way to describe the Holy Trinity, but it's kind of like the Father imagines himself in a way, and that imagination image is emanating of perfection. And so it itself is an image that is the exact perfection of God. And that is kind of like the Son. And the two share such an intense loving gaze because they are gazing on perfection, that gaze becomes almost this power of love that is the third person of the Trinity and the Holy Spirit. Again, I'm probably butchering that. There's no perfect way to explain that, but that is kind of the essence of how Augustine expressed the Trinity. And that's what the human family is built off of, originally expressed perfectly through, imperfectly through Adam and Eve, but then perfectly through Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. And like the husband and the wife being able to not only publicly express their love in front of their peers and loved ones, but also to share in that conjugal love through, the sexual act, sexual union, to produce offspring. Like that is kind of the physical imagery on earth that we have of the Holy Trinity, which is so, so cool. And you're right. Like there are couples that may never have children, even if they're trying to, that it's painful to hear that. But there's still like a vocation that God has for those people.
100%. And that's the thing. And the clarification there, right, is like, I heard that like no marriage is complete without the longing and the openness to children, right? And that needs to be heard very clear, because when I hear that, I'm like, that's kind of outrageous. But then you hear it again, it's like, no family is complete without children. No family is complete without being open to children.
Right. Yeah.
And the analogy that I heard was, somebody drowning in a pool and you're walking by and you can swim. So you have a couple choices, right? You can either go in to save that person, or you can walk by and not save that person, right? Obviously, one is clearly right, one is clearly wrong. However, then there's the other scenario where you're walking by somebody who is drowning, and you can't swim, and if you jump in, you're actually going to hinder the ability to save this person, right? But you can't swim, but in your heart of hearts that you want to save that person. And that's the analogy that I've heard of it. It's like the desire is there, and your goodness is complete, right? It's just it's the inability to do it.
Yeah, I've never heard that before. I think that works.
It works.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, that's not my analogy.
I'm no expert.
I'm just saying that's not my analogy, but
right.
That's the analogy I heard. And I said, okay, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
It made sense to me beforehand, but
Sure.
but it makes sense to me there.
Definitely. Yeah.
But yes, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like this longing for children, this desire for children, this family aspect to it. But to what you were talking about before, it's like I am a father of 4 right now. I'm going to be a father of 5, and it, like, where is this love coming from? Because you said you don't have 1 yet, but like you don't have 2, but like my wife and I were just talking about this the other day, and it's like we've been so concentrated on the fact that our 4 children are going to be older siblings again, and for the first time for my son, to a 5th child. And for 5-6 months, we're like super excited for the kids. But the other day, I don't know what happened. I just stopped, and I looked at my wife, and I'm like, this is the first time I've actually thought about that we're going to be parents again, you know, and that's kind of unfair to us. But it was the first time. I'm talking about a couple of weeks ago. She's due in June, but it was a couple of weeks ago. They're like, I cannot believe that I haven't thought about the fact that we're going to be parents again. And then that had me reflecting on this concept of loving children. And obviously I think about how God is love and can express his love infinitely, regardless of how many people in the world and how many of there are. And I can relate to that because I loved my eldest, then my second was born, and it's not like, oh, I know I love my eldest 50% now it's 50-50. Now my third is now it's 33%, now it's 25%, or now going on 20%. That's not it. It's like I can't explain it, but your heart just grows. Your heart figuratively grows to the point where now you just have more love. And that is, I mean, that's the Holy Spirit. That's grace right there. Like the ability to love more is absolutely wild. Which is why we keep having kids, I guess. I don't know, but and those who have multiple children know what I'm talking about. God willing, you'll experience this too, man. But it is one of the coolest things when I stop to think about how when every child has come in our lives, I have not loved one less. Pretty crazy.
Yeah, I've heard, maybe I haven't heard it from parents I know, but I've heard it said that like sometimes parents need a reminder that like even if you've had multiple children and you're kind of used to the whole parenting a newborn thing, for that newborn, it's still the first time go around for them,
totally.
You know, and they need that full amount of love, and being able to provide that and be conscious of that is important. It almost feels like in a way as a parent, you're not God clearly, but you're almost like this creative force similar to God with humanity, where you're outside of you're not outside of time, but you're kind of like outside of the timeline of your kids to some degree. And you get to like experience all of them and love them in their entire now through their whole life, at least until, you know, except for obviously tragic situations, at least until like you pass on from this earth. Right. And get to see your children and provide that love throughout their entire life. So it's a pretty humbling, extremely humbling experience, I think, to know that like I've created this other being, you know, in partnership with my spouse, and God created them, but I've done the physical act of creating them, and I'm now responsible for this person. And like, what an absolute gift it is. And this is something I wanted to circle back to, kind of what we were talking about before, because, you know, we've talked about pro-life issues on this podcast before. You've had entire conversations about that. And like, I think both of us look at the kids that, you know, the kids you have and the kid that I will have, and some of the waiting and some of the trauma that may have come along with that, you know, especially experiencing things like miscarriages that you guys had. And I'm just very, very grateful that we haven't had to go through that. But it's horrifying that there are people who just willingly throw their children away, literally through abortion and essentially murdering them. But here's what I realized, I think a couple of weeks ago at Pre-Cana. We were talking about finances as a reality of marriage, and kind of talking about how church wisdom teaches that people should fully combine their finances in marriage, just because you're a unit and there should be mutual decision making going on, especially with finances, but really in all aspects of life. And there's a lot of pushback. Almost nobody in the diocesan pre-Cana program is planning to do that, it turns out. And one young man with his spouse there, or future spouse there, shared just openly that the reason that they want to separate finances is because he saw his grandparents get divorced and his grandmother was left with nothing because everything was in his grandfather's name, which still the logic doesn't really make a whole lot of sense from what he was saying. I don't think.
Zero sense to me, but
I know. But his reasoning at the base was, we're going to plan so that if things do fail, that we'll both walk away, at least with some assets.
Right. What's mine is mine. What's yours is yours.
Yes. And that to me it's really just a symptom or a sign of the same disease in our culture of just like, if something is an inconvenience, just get rid of it. Just get rid of it. If the marriage is tough, just lose the marriage. If you don't want the kid, lose the kid. If the kid is born and it becomes a problem, well, you can just walk away. Like, how many families are broken, or how many families have absent fathers or absent mothers, or parents who get into drugs or alcohol or whatever and really just disregard the well-being and safeguard of their own family. I do think that there's this horrible undertone of apathy and you know, we live in this materialistic culture where you can order something on Amazon and throw away your old thing and it's not a big deal. And I think that's just seeped into like our human relationships at a very deep and poisonous level.
I do that way too often.
Right. Yeah.
Like, as opposed to learning how to fix something and it's going to cost me $10. So it's like, all right, this is broken, throw it out, buy something new for $60. Do it way too often. Right. And so like, I'm a victim of that also, but I think you're right. And I know, obviously know your stance, and we've spoken about this prior to you and Julia expecting, but it does take on a new light. You know, it is a different perspective to have. And again, it is mind blowing. It's wild, but a couple of things, right? Number one, it's the society we live in now, unfortunately. And it's influence, like it's not only society influencing everybody, but also college campuses are influencing everybody, and the media is influencing everybody. So there's part of it that's just, this is the way it is right now. And then there's part of it, no, there are people who are literally just pushing this nonsense. And the nonsense is the two sides of the spectrum. Number one, children are a nuisance. Number two, children are a right. Both of those are opposite side of the spectrum. And you meet in the middle. And at the end of the day, children are not either of those. They are a gift, right? And if we as a society can focus on that, we'll be in a much better place. And I know this because the latter that I mentioned, where children are a right, I was in that mindset for a good amount of time. Yeah. Prior to having our first, we finally came to a realization that is not the right mindset to have. Thank God. But for the majority of time, when we were married and didn't have any children, we're like, we deserve this. We are good people, right? Yeah. This is a right.
And that's where if you're not careful, it leads you down the road of unnatural child procreation, in the sense of like in vitro, and, you know, hiring out a surrogate to carry a baby, and like all this stuff that is really kind of just not the way that we're supposed to do things as Catholics, but just as human beings. And
right. That's a black and white, right? So that's a black and white. Abortion we're talking about is a black and white. I will say that I can't stand in the shoes. Like, I can't put myself in the shoes of somebody who is pro-abortion. It's tough for me to do that. However, I can sympathize with the yearning for a child.
100%. Yeah, you know what I mean? I get that.
So I get that. Again, it's a black and white, but I get that totally. And my heart, you know, it sinks when I hear things like that.
Yes, yeah, but I think it just goes back to like, if you do have that trust in God, if you do have the mindset of everything is a gift, like you just said, just gratitude. And I don't like probably 80% of the time I don't have the mindset that I should around gratitude. But if you can maintain that, then it's like, if the good happens, I'm going to be grateful. If the bad happens, I'm going to be grateful. There's an awesome prayer that I think for Lent is really good to pray. It's called the Litany of Humility. Mm-hmm. And we talked about it, but it's like this whole litany of prayers saying, God, like, free me from all of my desires, free me from wanting to be ahead of others, free me from like the things that I believe that I deserve, and like allow me to just depend entirely on you no matter what comes to me, and allow other people to go before me, allow everything that I want to be put behind what other people may want or need. It's a horrible prayer in the sense that it really like checks you mentally and spiritually. Right. And you probably are going to have like some stuff that you don't necessarily want to happen afterwards, because God is like, you asked for being humbled. It's going to happen now. Yeah. But I do think it's a great prayer to pray. And I do think that it's a big mindset shift that probably everybody needs. And it's like, sometimes I find myself thinking about and talking about our culture and how poisonous and horrible and all those other words that I used before, how bad the culture is. But then when I give myself just a little bit of space to actually think about, well, what does that mean for me? And what does that mean for my future family? And what does that mean for really the Christian world? It's that we need a lot more saints, and we need a lot more propagation of this beautiful, amazing faith and this beautiful, amazing church that Christ gave us in pursuit of him. It's funny, even like one of my friends sent a joke like, oh, Father Greeley, good job. Like, cause I was in seminary, I was thinking about becoming a priest. And I think about like, wow, how crazy that with my kid, this is something my parents never did. But with my kid, if I have a son someday, like, it's almost like a duty of mine to talk to him about vocation and talk to him about potentially priesthood, like that kind of stuff. Talk about, and even if nobody becomes a priest, nobody becomes religious sister, whatever, like talking about what holy marriage means. Like that's a conversation that never happened necessarily about like what holy Christian marriage should necessarily be. And from a sacramental point of view, it's radical stuff in our culture, but it's stuff that as Christians, like it's such a cool, amazing adventure to be able to kind of have the duty and the charge made to us to do that.
You know what it is? Part of it is very refreshing and kind of takes the burden off of us as parents to have the church at our back, because they, again, obviously we've got the Eucharist, we've got everything else that goes with the church, but a cool little bonus is they kind of created the blueprint for us where, there are some things where, you can raise your kids this way or that way, but this is your road. This is the road you should stay on. And I don't need to pave a road now. Right. Somebody paved the road for me. Right. Meanwhile,
this was called the way originally by the early Christians for a reason. It's literally the way we're supposed to walk.
Absolutely. And those without faith. And again, and I find myself doing this where I'm panicking on when we're raising kids, and I'm like, which way, like, what's the right way to take my kids down? Like, do I take them down this road or this road or this road? When I could have solved that problem just taking a step back and say, okay, what is the way? The way, capital T, capital W, right? Yeah. Maybe if I ask myself that more, I won't stress about raising kids as much. I'll stress about it, but not as much, Yeah. But again, the road is there. We just need to follow the map. And the map is there. The map is there. I don't know. The road's there.
The road is there. The map is there. The highway is there. Life is a highway. And I'm going to ride
it. But you know what I mean? It's just, it's a breath of fresh air. And I'm saying, okay, I just need to take a step back. What's best for my children's soul? Right. So maybe that's the question that I need to ask more. If I'm really discerning something about my kids or how I'm raising my family, the question I need to ask myself more is what's the decision that is going to give all of us as a family the best shot of getting to heaven. Mm-hmm. Right. I need to do that more for sure.
Yeah. I think Lent is a great time to think about the Beatitudes as far as like what is going to bring us holiness. And some of it is like stuff that we need to check on ourselves, but some of it is like, okay, I feel like I'm in good pursuit of this. And I was listening to a podcast from Every Knee Shall Bow, one of our favorites. And they were talking about, the host on there was talking about what it means to be one of the people who is seeking righteousness, where Jesus says, blessed are those who seek righteousness. He talked about those who are, religious hypocrites. He talked about those who have real greed issues, which is really what Jesus talks the most about in the Bible, in the Gospels, is greed and the poison that can really sow. But like the pursuit of righteousness, the desire for righteousness, and that righteousness really is like the desire for the expansion of the kingdom of heaven here on earth. And that's something that just got me very fired up in the concept of starting a family and expanding, my own lineage, so to speak, and being able to kind of spread that to future generations.
Totally.
My wife and I have talked a lot about like, we have such an opportunity to have such an impact on the generational. We talk about generational wealth from like a financial perspective to some degree, but even more so maybe from a spiritual perspective. Like we can have such an impact on our children and our children's children just by trying to instill these values, just like our great grandparents did. And that's why we are the way we are, that has trickled down through generations and, ebbed and flowed and maybe even strong one generation and weaker another generation. But like we can continue trying to set that tone to, at least in our spheres and our circles of influence, to be able to hopefully bring people closer to Christ in our lives and bring ourselves to heaven at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Well, let Christ bring us to heaven. We're not doing anything for ourselves.
Right. I finally perfected my response when I only had girls, when I was a girl dad. I finally perfected my response when somebody would say, you need to have the boy, you need to carry on your name. Right. I heard that a million times. I had one daughter, then two daughters, and three daughters, and I heard that a million times. And finally, probably like right before Lincoln was born, and I haven't been able to use it since, somebody said, it's got to be a boy, you got to carry on your name. And I said, what's more important to me than my name is my values. And then I had a boy. So maybe I just needed to say that.
Yeah, God was like, finally, you said the right thing.
And I never got to use it again.
We are following your guys' example and not finding out the sex of the baby until birth.
It's the best.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, I try to not come from a judgmental place on this podcast. I'm judging you if you find out the sex of your kid. I'm joking, but I'm just saying, like, it was the best. It was one of the only natural surprises that you ever get. And then before our eldest was born, Katie would always push, like, she wanted to wait. I wanted to find out. And I would always say, well, we got a plan. If it's a boy or girl, we got a plan. She's like, what? I was like, I don't know, the color of the room and the clothes. She goes, there's plenty of neutral colors.
Green, everything green.
Well, we did gray with white and yellow accents, right?
Nice. Okay.
Nice. So there's plenty of neutral colors, and you get, and I told this to somebody. Oh no, somebody told me, they're like, no, you wait so that a bunch of people get you clothes that can be for boys and girls, and then you have the boy or girl, and they get you more clothes for it.
Exactly.
There it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's really, like, when you stop and think about it, how much can you actually plan for either a boy or a girl? It's not that much. It's not that much when you actually think about it.
And how much opportunity do you have for like true surprise in your life?
Yeah, exactly.
And you've talked about your experiences, and we talk about, like, in the delivery room, like, it's just going to be us there along with like the medical team and everything, but it's just going to be us there. And in that moment, like, we can just dwell in that present moment where our family is like complete in that moment, right? Like, not complete forever necessarily, but in that moment we're like, we are whole and we are a family, and all the outside noise is just silent for a little bit.
Right.
And then we'll start responding to the parents who are begging to know what the baby is and all that kind of stuff.
I also don't like giving advice on this podcast. However, I am a father of four, so I will give this advice.
Maybe this is a good ending point. Loren's advice session here.
Yeah, totally. But I'll say this, like, everybody is going to want to know, right? Sean, Julie, is it a boy or a girl? What's the weight? What's the name you landed on? Blah, blah, blah. I know they're in the hospital. You got to tell your family and friends, it's going to happen, but I'm not reaching out to anybody for hours.
Absolutely.
For hours. no news is good news. So if you don't hear from me, don't assume something's going wrong.
Right.
So at least you put your family at ease at that point.
Right.
But that gives you the opportunity to take that time and spend it with Julia and your child. And this goes for anybody, with your wife, your husband, and your child in that moment, because you will never get that moment ever again.
100%.
Right?
Did I tell you though that, oh, sorry, you can finish.
No. That's all I got.
Did I tell you that Julia stumbled upon something where you can kind of create like a betting, it's almost like a over under, so to speak, of like guessing different things about the baby, like, or it's prop bets, so to speak, like
sweet
boy, girl, weight, height, like all these different things. Like
I may have done that for our first.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Oh, we're all in on doing it and turning it into
Yeah.
like a 50-50 fundraiser or something like that.
Yeah, man, let's go. I'll spearhead that with you.
There we go.
All
There we
about
go.
it.
Perfect.
Also, that's the other piece of advice. Bet on your child.
Bet on your child.
That's it.
Your kid is just a racehorse in this life, so you might as well start betting immediately. No, just kidding. That's terrible advice.
Terrible advice. But yeah, terrible advice. But again, that's my advice out there as a father of 4. You know, meanwhile, we took those moments with every kid, and then it ended. I'm like, you good? Because I gotta get back to our other kids.
You seem fine.
You've done this before, right? Well, there are 3 kids who are like dying to see at least one of us right now. So I'm just gonna go right now. So, but again, that's the reason for the hiatus. A lot of stuff going on. Great stuff between the two of us.
Mm-hmm.
In a few months, we're going to have 2 extra Just parishioners. So stay tuned. We'll give you updates. For sure.
Yeah. But thank you guys for your patience, and hopefully you keep listening.
Absolutely.
We'll keep turning it out.
Obviously, we got the social media feeds. We got Instagram. We got Facebook at Just a Parishioner. We got our website, which I need to update now. But it's justaparishioner.com. But definitely check us out on all those channels. Share this podcast. Share it with everybody. If you're listening during Lent, I hope you have a blessed Lent as well as an amazing Easter if you don't hear from us beforehand. But outside of that, what else you got?
Check out our sponsors, Hallow App, Purple Mattress, and what else is behind us? Oh, we talked about The Chosen a lot.
Yes.
So The Chosen.
Oh, The Chosen. Yeah, absolutely. Not a sponsor, but what an amazing show.
None of them are sponsors, but, you know, if they want us on their stuff, then they can have us. That's fine, too.
Awesome. And as always, please pray for us. We will be praying for you.
Thank you all.
Carrying up my say